Greetings. The image on the screen highlights the topic of this lesson, globalization. Refer to information you will find on the first 3 pages of the first study guide. There's also a reference to globalization in the first chapter in the text. Globalization has a lot of different interpretations and meanings. I found this cartoon to be rather interesting in highlighting it. But if you will notice down at the bottom of the first page of the first study guide, I've included this definition of globalization. Study that for a moment and kind of get a feel for what is involved. One of the more interesting approaches here is the fact that this is not something that is brand new. As a matter of fact, elements of globalization have been around for a very long period of time. For example, Pax Romana, the Roman Empire. Rome created a vast empire and then had various social, political, and economic links. This highlights some of them. Furthermore, some of you might remember efforts on the part of especially European merchants to establish far-flung trading routes with what was then referred to as Cathay, the Far East, the so-called Silk Road. Well, these were early, very early examples of globalization. So we're not talking about anything new. Who knows, we might even see globalization resulting in this. Also, remember that when you reference globalization, you're highlighting the fact that, look at number 2, social relationships don't automatically stop at a nation's borders. Today, different ethnic groups are migrating frequently, and more people are coming in to sustain contact with one another. Now, this is enhanced in part by some remarkable developments when it comes to inexpensive international travel as well as communication. And certainly I think most of you recognize the implications of all of that. In addition, one country's problems or concerns are really part of a much larger global situation or circumstance. When you talking about issues such as unemployment, pollution, violence, the spread of infectious diseases, all of this is tied in to globalization. And what appears to be simply an event close at hand, a local event, may very well be linked to events happening in other parts of the world. That's particularly true when it comes to such things as a plant closing in your community because the company has decided to move the entire operation to another country, or for that matter, gas prices. And if you're like me, you become aware of the fact that we depend on a lot of folks we don't ever see and interact with directly. They're kind of a faceless mob, but they produce, deliver, manufacture all those things that you and I take for granted. Plus today, perhaps more so than any time in human history, you have multinational organizations, likewise international corporations, etc., special interest groups that are becoming major forces in our lives. I can highlight just a few of these. The World Trade Organization. It was created in 1994. It functions more or less like a court in conflict resolutions as to national laws that violate free trade, or the International Monetary Fund. This organization loans money. It advises on economic issues and works to support developing economies in poorer nations of the world. It's strongly committed to the idea of a free market. Or for that matter, look at the impact of Facebook. the internet, and Mickey D's or McDonald's. In addition, it is interesting that efforts to open and reduce national boundaries or borders are often accompanied simultaneously by efforts to protect those same borders or boundaries. Frequently you see today countries seeking to attract and process passengers and cargo from around the world, yet these same countries employ increasingly complex security systems. In general, there's some Americans who employ very patriotic notions and ideas when it comes to protecting the nation's borders, but at the same time they expect to have access to products from all over the world. And then last but not least, the production process is drawing more and more and more on labor and raw materials from all over the world. It's kind of hard to say with absolute certainty, for example, is a product made truly in the United States. One who buys a Ford automobile or perhaps an RCA or Motorola television is likely to purchase something with less American workmanship than if he or she bought a Honda car or a Mitsubishi TV. An anthropologist by the name of Guest has come up with what he considers to be some of the basic highlights, if you will, or dynamics. This is the terminology that he uses of globalization. Take a moment and review these. As to the first, Guest makes the argument that globalization is transforming the way we think about time and space. The world is no longer as big as it used to be. Our sense of how long it takes to do something has been rather dramatically changed. Furthermore, notice the second point. And you want to always remember with respect to that first, a lot of this has been brought about with respect to some really, really significant changes when it comes to communicative and transportation technologies. We're able to now literally again transport vast amounts of goods by sea, and because of a wide variety of interesting communicative technologies, we're able to communicate with people instantaneously around the world. One of the first interesting devices was Telstar, the first international communication satellite. In addition, you want to note that these communication and technology innovations have allowed corporations to employ much more flexible approaches or methods to generate profits. Particularly, it's enabled them, in many respects, to engage in activities that are really going to enhance their profit margins. A good example of this is, of course, outsourcing, moving the whole operation to another country where the costs of labor are lower and where there are perhaps less restrictive environmental guidelines, rules, or laws. Look also at number 3. Increasing migration. International migration involves probably each year, it's estimated according to Guest, 200 million people. There's about 38 million Americans who migrate each year. Perhaps 400 million a year migrate within their own country, literally moving from rural areas to urban areas in search for work. But what's happening with globalization is there's a lot of unequal development. Globalization has not brought about equal benefits. Some can travel the globe for business or pleasure, but others have absolutely no access to transportation. 50% of the world's people, according to Guest, now have cell phones, but that distribution is uneven. Most are concentrated in North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. There are areas in Africa where there are few, if any, people who have access to cell phones. Plus, the even more worrisome, global poverty is increased rather dramatically over the last 20 years. 40% of the world's population now lives in poverty. That's defined by an income of less than $2 a day. 1 billion people live in extreme poverty, which are surviving on less than $1 a day. And then last but not least, dramatic change. Change has been a constant, but because of all these remarkable innovations in communication and transportation, we're witnessing again change on a really, really dramatic scale. And as globalization increases, it's important to remember that's increased human impact not only on other humans, but on the planet itself. And this has further accelerated the pace of change. An example that Guest uses is a floating island of plastic debris the size of Texas, caught up at an intersection of several ocean currents. Plus, he notes that some researchers think that as a result of consumer byproducts, fertilizer runoff, combined with overfishing and oil spills, the result may be, by as early as 2050, much of the edible sea life will be destroyed, killed off, if you wish. Now, those who study globalization are quick to point out, don't go overboard. Now, if you go over to the third page of the study guide, I've highlighted the fact that there are certain, if you want to call them factors or forces or influences, that really in effect work to restrict globalization and its influence. The first one is perhaps in many respects the most interesting. There are observers who often refer to this as global baloney, that although we talk about globalization, we're still rather provincial. In other words, people are pretty strongly committed to their particular nation or society. They tend to view their way of living as being superior, a process we'll talk about later on, referred to as ethnocentrism. And I looked at an article several years ago in Newsweek magazine in which the writer highlighted the fact that about 1/2 of global trade, investment, as well as migration takes place within regions, much of it between adjoining or neighboring countries. Exports account for only around 25 to 30% of the global economy. Plus, less than 25% of internet traffic crosses national borders. So nationalism and ethnocentrism can tend to restrict the spread of globalization, as can the fear of change. We become very comfortable with the way things are. It's sometimes difficult to change despite what we have, even if we have very, very little. Likewise, we often oppose that which isn't the way of our parents, our people, our family, our religious beliefs, for example. Tradition is a potent resistance or resistor to the spread of globalization. And then there's last but not least, human initiative and social movements. Simply put, people can either encourage and welcome globalization efforts or oppose them. Some folks will be opposed to globalization out of a wide variety of concerns, including fear. People may fear their future, but at the same time, they may very well see globalization as providing genuine and innovative benefits for their children. And what's interesting to me is that there are some organizations working in the world today that employ violence, and their aim is to return to a kind of pre-modern social, economic, political, and religious system or structure. Yet they readily employ modern, sophisticated computer and communicative technologies to accomplish their goals. Two good examples of that: Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Until next time.